Good morning and welcome to the Cox & Co webinar, part of a series of webinars that are geared to opening aspects of the payroll process, helping you to understand what we deal with day in, day out, helping to make us all better at what we do, and to try and demystify some of the things that we refer to on a day-by-day basis. So today's webinar is about P45s. Everyone has heard of a P45, but do we all know exactly what they are, what their purpose is, when we can use them, when they become useless, etc., etc. So during the course of this presentation, we'll try and look at some of those areas and educate you along the way. So Bella, let's have the agenda for today. So today we're going to look at covering the following areas. P45s, essentials for employee financial wellness. I think the key thing here is it's a big picture. A small thing like a P45 can cause difficulties, discontent, frustration amongst the workforce, employers, and it's really unnecessary if we all understand our part in the process and what we need to do. So first we'll look at what is a P45. Been around for donkey's years. Surfed the internet, tried to find out when the first one was sent and first one was used. It wouldn't have been prior to PAYE because then there was no need to pass this information around. But all I can say is that they've changed very little in the 15 to 20 years I've been involved in payroll. They've turned from a carbonated document to a PDF, but in essence, they look very much the same. So we'll look at what is a P45, what information is on a P45, how long is it valid for, the parties to whom it's useful, and how long it is useful to them. Obtaining a P45, so what are an employee's rights to receive a P45? What should they do with it? How should they get it if they don't get it automatically, etc. And specifically how they would receive it from us as on behalf of yourselves. The importance of a P45 for employees. It's a very important document to all parties. Its usefulness diminishes over time depending on the party involved, but it's important to an employee. The importance of a P45 for employers. So it's an equally important document for employers, people like yourselves. And over time, the use of P45 documents has reduced. People don't present them in the same way they used to, perhaps because they don't receive a paper copy. It's a document on their email, stroke their hard drive, Google Drive, whatever. And so they're just not there readily available to hand. And so they don't move through the system as well as they once did. And P45 is an employee wellness. So what is the bigger picture? What does processing a P45 correctly, doing the right things with it, do for the employee and hence the employer? So if we could move on to what is a P45? So from the beginning to the end, a P45 is a document that is used at the beginning, potentially, of your work journey and your journey with a specific employer. And it's a document that is produced at the end. So within that, during the course of your employment, you'll be attracted, you'll be recruited and onboarded, hopefully retained for some significant period of time whilst you're being developed. But ultimately, it's perfectly possible that you would then leave your employment. You'd want to be offboarded and moved on to your next employer with minimum fuss and maximum communication. And ultimately, that means your employee potentially, or the employee joining you, leaves with a great experience, moves on to their next job, has a P45 to give to their new employer. And as a consequence of that, things are better for them. So on to the next slide. So what is a P45? Well, in common parlance, and it's a document that everyone knows what it means, I think. It means someone has come to the end of their employment. People talk about P45s. Here I picked a snapshot from the 2017 Conservative Conference, when most famously a P45 was given to the then Prime Minister Theresa May. The significance, the impact of that is quite clear. It's a clear indication that perhaps she is no longer welcome in her post and she needs to move on. Earlier than that, Tony Blair referenced his P45 in PMQs when he, the day after he resigned from being Prime Minister. He talked about his P45 and he gave some salient points from it. The last of which was that the document should be retained. Interesting that he would need to keep it. We all need to keep P45s. It's more important ultimately to the employee than it is to the employer. But it's a valuable document that communicates information from one employment to the next. It's a snapshot in time. So it tells your new employer how much taxable pay you received and how much tax you paid on your income from them. And it means that information can be transferred to your new employer and taken into account in tax calculations. So it will ensure that you pay, with one or two caveats, the correct amount of tax. The one certain thing is you're far more likely to pay the correct amount of tax with a P45 than you are without one. There are systems and procedures for dealing with an employee who doesn't have a P45, but there is no substitute for the real thing. So what is a P45? So included on your P45, and I've got a copy that I'll show you in a minute. You probably have all have seen them. You may not have looked at them particularly closely because, why would you? It may be something that you just want to forget because you left the job. If your new employer is lucky, will have received it from you, and of the 4 original pages, only 1 will remain with you. But on that document, as I say, it's a snapshot in time. It carries information from one employer to the next. It means you don't have to tell them, and it validates that information. So it's an official document that moves that information from A to B. Most importantly on it are your income and tax contributions for the year in which you left employment. So if you move from one job to another within a tax year, so tax year runs from 6th of April to the 5th of April, if you leave a job in June or July and move to a new employer in August, that P45 has a lot of relevant information on it that your employer in the ideal world needs to know. More importantly, you as an employee would need to know it too, or you need your employer to know so that they can communicate it to the tax office. The tax office can not interfere with the tax coding process, and you will pay the right amount of tax on your earnings. It's proof of employment, so it's a valuable document. Sometimes, particularly, we come across it quite often with employees who are moving abroad, for example. Part of the visa process often necessitates them producing a proof of employment. And what better proof of employment is there than a P45? We get, it's at that point that we discover that employees have not notified us of changes of address, haven't told us about changes of marital status and name, perhaps. But it's a valuable document. It has a useful purpose, and in some circumstances, it's pretty much the only document you can use. It's given to the employee at the end of their employment. So when an employee leaves an employment, it is their legal right to receive a P45. It's not your legal right to insist on a P45 when they join you, although a lot of employers will be very specific in requiring a P45 when an employee joins their business, which I personally think is a very good thing. If you insist on it, whilst understanding that not every employee will have a P45 when they join you. Although they're entitled to receive one, the actual process of receiving one, there can be timing issues. They may join you before their final payment is made by their old employer. And if they do that, it would disadvantage them not to delay the issuing of that P45 until they leave their employment. So there are circumstances under which you or a new employer would, whilst be quite insistent you should produce a P45, they also need to understand that It won't always happen. In the case there is no P45, that's fine. A new employee starter form, such as the Cox & Co. new employee starter form, will suffice. It will provide all the information that's required, but it does require the employee to declare their tax status. And it's not always the easiest thing to do. They can get it wrong. If they get it wrong, then it's possible they won't be taxed correctly. So wherever possible, part of the onboarding process of an employer should be to ask for a P45 and hopefully receive it. Our new starter form provides a tick box, I think, that asks the employer or the employee completed the form, is there a P45? If there is, we need to know about it. More importantly, we would need to receive it. So ideally uploaded to the portal at the same time as a new starter form. All that documentation is held together, and everyone's happy. We have what we need when we need to process them as a joiner, and in all likelihood, with all the documentation, it will be a smoother process, and they will ultimately benefit from that. So the P45 should ideally be passed from the old employer to the employee, and that employee should pass it to their new employer. So there are 4 pages to a P45, a couple of which are pretty much redundant these days, because historically they used to be paper documents, carbonated, with 4 separate pages. Nowadays they are a PDF, and whilst you might see all 4 pages, the need for the first and last pages is negligible. The first page is the one you used to send to the HMRC in the revenue, as it was, and that was, they couldn't do anything until they received it. Nowadays it's electronic. Everything is passed the minute an employee joins you, or in actual fact, the minute the FPS is submitted for the first payroll. HMRC are notified of their existence. All the information that used to be carried on a piece of paper is notified electronically. So that's submitted to HMRC via RTI. So yeah, that's covered that slide. Thank you very much. So what information is on a P45? As I say, I'll show you an example in a minute, but some of the important information it carries and some notable exceptions, because a P45, because it's been in existence since the year dot, it carries a lot of information, but it doesn't carry some of the information you will need, either because in days gone by it wasn't needed, so student loans being an obvious example of that, or because over time it's just not required for moving an employee from one post to another. So the information it carries is employee identification, obviously name, address, date of birth, all those important details that we as a new employer require. National insurance number. It should carry their full name, not an abbreviated, shortened version of their name. It should, if the prior employer has taken the correct details and done as HMRC asks and pass on full names rather than truncated versions, it will carry that information. And so it's useful to check the information that you may have received on another document, for example, new starter form. Beth may have completed or may have called herself Beth on your new starter form, but you may discover that she's actually Elizabeth Rose. Elizabeth Rose, of course, is what you should be using. Tax code and national insurance number. So tax code is of crucial importance. Your tax code carried from one job to another is what determines ultimately the tax you pay. The other information it carries is about your taxable earnings and taxable earnings in the year to date and any tax you paid in the year to date. So depending on your tax code, tax codes come in a couple of varieties. There's a cumulative tax code. Cumulative tax codes are self-correcting as you move from one job to another. If there's a gap in your employment, when you ultimately join your new employer, everything will stabilize, will balance. Any personal allowance you haven't used in an intervening period will be used in the calculation of your first pay, and you will then possibly receive a tax rebate. So any tax you've overpaid on the revised calculation, you'll receive back through your pay. But it will also make sure that you pay the correct amount of tax going forward. So very important. The other type of tax code is a week one, month one tax code. And they're generally, they're not as useful in terms of they'll never correct a tax position. They're not self-correcting. You can move from one job to another, and your P45 will ensure that the tax code and anything that's held within it. So tax codes are based on several things, the personal allowance being the prime one, but then there can be other things that affect your tax. You may have had a married allowance that you have passed to someone else, or you've received from someone else. Those will affect your tax code. And ultimately, the tax code on your P45 will ensure that those are carried forward. Even with a week one, month one tax code, it has some use. But cumulative tax codes are the holy grail, what everyone wants and needs, because ultimately they make sure that things are you get to the end of a tax year in theory with zero or very low liabilities. Week one, month one tax codes, because they make no reference to any other pay in any other period, they're in isolation. They can lead things to go astray. Things that aren't on the P45, student loans. So there's a student loan box on the P45, which indicates you're paying off a student loan. What it doesn't tell you, because it's a historical situation, when student loans were first invented, there was one type of student loan, one threshold, everyone paid it back at the same rate. So why would you need to know anything else? Nowadays, there are myriad student loans in force. There's Plan 1, Plan 2, Plan 4 for Scottish students, and postgraduate loans. So there's a whole series of loans, student loans potentially. The P45 does not carry that information. What does carry that information is a correctly completed new starter form, which is why we, when we're dealing with you guys, employers, we ask you for a Cox & Co new starter form, ideally. We'll accept an HMRC new starter form on the basis that it's okay, doesn't carry all the information we need. Why would it? It's HMRC. But ultimately, it gives the basic details. But in the ideal world, we want our new starter form with a P45. That way, we get all the information we need. We get a P45, and we will apply the correct tax code based on the information on that P45. P45s carry no information on, as I say, they're limited information on student loans, not enough for an employee to pay the right student loan. And if they don't pay the right student loan, they potentially pay too much or too little back. They'll actually pay too much or the right amount, because it's all based, the default is a Plan 1 loan. Plan 1 has the lowest threshold and highest percent. So without additional information, that student can only overpay the loan. They can't underpay it. Why would anyone want to pay more back than they need to? It may all come out in the wash at the end. Better to get it right from day one and not cause any hassle to anyone concerned. There is absolutely no reference on a P45 to national insurance or pension contributions. National insurance contributions are included on a P60. So the relationship between P60s and P45s, which is which, we often get asked for P60s for people who have no entitlement to P60s because they've left during a year. P60 is only issued to a currently employed on the 5th of April. So if you left on the 31st of March, you're sat there waiting to fill in your self-assessment tax return, waiting for your P60. I can tell you it will never arrive. You're not entitled to one. You shouldn't receive one. And so the only place you're going to get the information you need on tax is your P45. You will not get information on national insurance. So P60s do carry that information. So there, why it's not carried on a P45, I'm sure is a historical thing. But regardless of the reasons, it's not carried on that document. So you need to retain other documents that give you that information. So national insurance, P60s give you that information, as do payslips. So legal requirement to include that information on a payslip, statutory deductions. Our payslips include details of both employee and employer national insurance, which is not always the case. The employee national insurance will always be present because it must be shown by law. Employer national insurance that's not the case. And pension contributions don't appear on P6s or P45s. So the only evidence you will ever have of your pension contributions is either the pension provider. So most pension providers will have a portal or send you annual updates, statements, etc. But the other great source is your payslip, because again, on a payslip will show employee and employer contributions. So keep your final payslip is, in terms of tax and national insurance, will have in terms of tax and tax paid, will carry the same information. It should match your P45. And your old employer's PAYE reference. PAYE references, that's the reference that you as an employer you are identified by. So you will have a PAYE scheme, which we'll refer to from time to time. PAYE schemes have PAYE references and accounts office references. What will appear on the P45 is a PAYE reference, and that may become important in future. If ever your tax affairs become complicated, or heaven forbid HMRC make a mistake, then those documents, the detail of who you were employed by, when you were employed, and who HMRC know those employers by, because often employers will trade under a different name. But a PAYE reference is a clear, unambiguous, identifier which everyone can use and refer to. So that's that one then, Bella. So how long is a P45? Yeah, so this is an example of a P45. I spun through most of it. We'll have a quick look at it, but nothing that we haven't covered, I don't think. So we've got various fields numerically arranged. So fill in 1, 2, 3, 4. Of course, in days gone by, someone would have got one of these and completed it with a pen using their P32, which or P11, employee P11, which was handwritten by a scribe, and you would take great care over completing this document, knowing full well that one mistake would lead you to having to complete the document again, because they predate Tip-X and correction fluid and all the rest of it. So you had to get it right. It's important these things are right. Of course, now it's important the information is right, but that information will be driven by what is on our records. What is on our records is available through our portal, so you can view it on the portal. And it's important that you have an awareness and know that that information is right, because that is the information ultimately that will be passed to the next employer and passed to HMRC when the employee leaves. So you got employer PAYE reference, employee's national insurance number, a unique identifier. Everyone, well, the majority of the workforce will have one. You'll have it for life, and once you get old and grey like me, you know it off by heart. So but it's a unique identifier carried from one employment to the next, which is great. And you don't have to worry about when your employer asks you for your new national insurance number. Your title, so various options are given there. Your surname or family name and your first name. Important that those boxes are correctly completed. They obviously will be, because it's coming out of our system at the end. But it's important that an individual checks that it really is their name, that the name hasn't been misarranged, misspelt, or anything of that nature. Date you left employment. Again, a critical date. not always as clear as it could be, and sometimes the leave-in date is what causes a delay in issuing a P45. What you don't want to do as an employer, and what we don't want to do as a payroll bureau, is to release a P45 prematurely, one that subsequently proves to be inaccurate because things have changed. Someone has been due some extra holiday pay, someone has been paid something unexpectedly. So it's of critical importance that when an employee leaves, they really leave, and that as far as is practical, they get all the payments to which they're entitled, so that the P45 is a document that carries all the information. Otherwise, you can get into difficulties. Student loan deduction. So if there is a student loan deduction, the default will be Plan 1, which, as I've already said, is going to mean over deduction rather than under deduction. Again, making sure the new employee notification form is correctly completed, particularly the student loan section, will ensure that the correct amount is repaid. Tax code at the leave-in date, the most critical thing on there, along with box 7, total pay to date and total tax to date. Those boxes will not always be completed, because the box above it, if week 1 or month 1 applies, goes straight to 8. If there is an indicator in one of those boxes, what that is telling you as an employer or an employee is that you're on a week 1, month 1 tax code. And if that's the case, it's not referencing any other pay in any other period. And so you will see those boxes will be blank or will have zeros. That can lead to questions at the end of the tax year, because P60s will not include this pay on them. And so from time to time, we get people saying this P60 is not correct because it doesn't include pay from previous employment. And the reason it won't include pay from previous employment is because that pay was paid on a week 1, month 1 basis. And if that's the case, we won't record it. It won't be recorded. So, and what I should have said right at the beginning, actually, I think I've got it covered elsewhere, is that there are 4 parts of a P45. Part 1 is the detail of employee leaving work, and that's a redundant page these days. Bearing in mind these were previously carbonated, every subsequent document will contain information from this, or won't contain information that's not required for that purpose. But this front page and the next page won't include everything. Sorry, my apologies. I very rarely see page 1. So page 1, totally redundant. It does include everything though. So everything that's on page 1 may not be on a subsequent pages. Part 1A is the one that is retained by the employee. So as an employer, you would give this to the employee, but you wouldn't expect to ever get one back. You will get them back, of course. Employees will give you their set of documents. If it's an electronic copy, then ultimately they also will have a copy in all likelihood. If they, in today's world, give you a paper copy for employee, you really want to give it back. That's an important part of their tax records, and it has absolutely no useful purpose in what you do. You don't want it, so you would give it back to the employee. So then the next page of it is part 2, which is for the new employer. So here you'll see what you as a new employer might get. And importantly, if they're on a week 1, month 1 tax code, you will know nothing of their previous pay and previous tax paid, which is why it won't be included on the P60, because you as an employer shouldn't know about it. You may, because you've seen other parts of the P45, but you have no need to know it. And so therefore, you as an employer, you wouldn't put it on the records, and it won't be on a P60. Then part 3, part 3 of your P45 again is a pretty redundant document. It's redundant if you have submitted the P45 with a copy of the new employee notification form, the Cox & Co new starter form, because in olden days, this carbonated copy was, and this bit wouldn't have been come through, this was for the new employer to fill in the current details of that employee. So they would put their new employee tax reference detail gathered from the employee when they joined them. up-to-date information. So, current address may differ from the one on the front page. So that would have been the document that an employer would complete, and then they would send it by snail mail to HMRC, and eventually it would be recorded and a tax code issued on paper. Nowadays, this is all this information is included in the first FPS, the first submission we as a bureau or you as an employer make to HMRC includes all of that relevant information, which might lead you to ask the question, why do I need a P45? Because I think P45s, ever since RTI was introduced in 2013-ish, 2012, I think, 2013 for all employers, then there has been talk of P45s disappearing, being something of the past. Because as a record for the employee, they have a vital purpose. As a record for the employer, then bearing in mind that when a P45 is issued, a P45 cannot be created until that submission has been made to HMRC. And if HMRC have received a submission of all that information, then the moment in time when that information arrives from their new employer, they should be able to quickly match it, issue a tax code, and it almost becomes something that you wonder with a bit of forward thought, what a new employer should be able to do is validate that employee, pull down the information, and life would be so much simpler. And certainly in the early years, there was talk of P45s disappearing completely. It's subsequently subsided now, and there seems no immediate prospect of a P45 ever disappearing. So we're going to need to keep asking for them, and you're going to need to keep giving them employees who leave you instructions on how to receive them. Sad but true. So how long is a P45 valid for? So valid for a P45 is an important document for as long as as an employee, is a valuable document for as long as you're likely to receive an inquiry about your tax affairs, or you would need to demonstrate something to HMRC about your tax affairs, or perhaps for other purposes. Your earnings might be required, although pension NI information isn't carried, you might need to demonstrate your earnings. So as an employee, you would be very wise to hang on to it for a long time. Its use to an employer diminishes over time, but to you, your tax, you're asked to retain records for 6 years plus current year. HMRC can go back 20 years into your, if they consider that something is amiss, they can go back way further. And the only way you could counter things is if you've got documentary evidence. And certainly before HMRC moved on to RTI, they used to not keep tax records for as long as you would hope. So although they could go back 20 years, they could possibly make an estimate or an assessment based on what they thought. And if you didn't have a document that contradicted that, you could end up paying more tax. So as an employee, keeping a P45 from every employment in a safe place is very good advice indeed. As an employer, and for proof of earnings and tax paid to an employer, a new employer, a P45 is valid for the financial year in which it was issued, and it also has relevance if it was issued in the prior year. So if we're sat today in the tax year 23-24 that started on the 6th of April 2023, if a leaving date, if a P45 is for this current tax year, then it is definitely an invaluable document, especially if it has a cumulative tax code. If it's for the prior year, so if it's for the year from 6th of April 2022 to 5th of April 2023, it doesn't have as much value, but it does have a value. As I said, it carries a tax code, and that tax code, in the absence of that tax code, then you are likely to be taxed. Well, you will be taxed using a different tax code, which may not reflect any allowances that are included in your tax code. So, and as an employer dealing with us on a day-by-day basis, I would always say, ask your employee for a P45 and pass it to us. If it's irrelevant or redundant, then we're not going to use it. But as with all information, better to have it and not use it than not have it at all. And as a consequence of that, not be able to deal with something correctly. So next slide. So obtaining a P45. So employers must issue anyone leaving their employment with a P45 regardless of the reason for leaving. So the reason for leaving might be retirement, redundancy, dismissal, and they may just have moved on to another job. The only exception to that is if an employee doesn't just leave you, but leaves this mortal coil. If they pass away, then we do not, and you should not, pass on a P45 to the employee. I think it's probably based in not wishing to cause upset and such like. It's one of those catch-22s, because ultimately, if you're bringing an estate to a close, you need to know what someone's been paid, what they've been taxed, etc. So actually, it's a useful document, but we shouldn't be issuing it to people in that circumstance. Employees should not have to request it from you. It should be issued as standard within 1 week. So this is a debating point. It needs to be issued. I mean, specifically, the requirement is issued before or at the time of termination, I think. So at or before the time the employee leaves, or at the point they leave. In practical terms, that is very unlikely to be possible. And so it is the case that it is as soon as practical after the employee has left. We as a business reckon that a week is about the right timeline. It gives the employer an opportunity to make a correction if one is required, and it can be incorporated in the P45, because once the P45 has been issued, then that's it. It's a document. It can't be changed. So it's important that it's right. So it's a balancing act between promptly giving an employee a P45 or making it available to the employee, but not getting in a position where the P45 that's been released to the wild ends up being an inaccurate document and doesn't reflect where the end game was. So our standard is to issue it within a week of the employee's normal pay date. If for some reason it's imperative that a P45 is issued earlier, it may be possible. But there are obviously systems, procedures, the way things are done that mean that ad hoc issuing a P45 because a new employer has asked for it, we would consider every case on its the situation really. Typically, P45s are provided electronically through a secure portal. So certainly with ourselves, we provide it on a secure portal. A P45 has got lots of personal identifiable information on it. It's not the most sensitive information, but it's certainly sensitive enough that someone with a P45 and that personal information could be in a better position to pretend to be someone else than they will be without it. So we transfer documents through the portal electronically. They're also available to employers to distribute via an internal mechanism. So we don't send them by post anymore. The pandemic saw an end to that, although I think we pretty much moved away from it before that. But we're also very, we don't want to send them by email where it can possibly be avoided. I wouldn't say we'll never send one by email, but there are other options that are far more satisfactory. And the portal, when a P45 is uploaded, it gives the employee a notification to tell them it's there. They can download it, they can store it as and when they wish, and they'll have portal access for 15 months from the point they left. So there's ample opportunity. Obviously, the sooner you do it, especially as a really should be passing it to their next employer. But yeah, so we pass them electronically. I'm sure the majority of other employers and bureau would do the same. But it's safe, secure, best way to do it. No bits of paper moving around the place, and everyone is happy. So we've probably made some of these points already. Importance of a P45 for employers. Essential document for onboarding of new employees. If I hadn't already said it, I'll say it again. P45, if an employee joins you, ask them for their P45. There may be good reasons why they don't have one, but if you don't ask, you don't get. And it will undoubtedly be better if they have one, and if they choose not to give it to you, that's where the problems begin. In having a P45 promptly, ideally for the first pay run, because as I said, P45s lose value over time. If an employee joins you in one pay period and they hand you the P45 at a later date, they are then at risk of that P45 not being used. So they're at risk of that P45 not being used, because there is a requirement. HMRC insist that the minute they issue a tax coding notice, be it correct or incorrect, the minute they issue one, your P45 from an employer's perspective, that P45 becomes obsolete, redundant, has no useful value whatsoever. So if they give it to you in month one, then in all likelihood it will impact, and HMRC will marry it with their records and they'll end up on the right tax code. If it isn't produced at day one, early on in the payroll process, HMRC can't match the records, issue a tax code, then you've got a problem, because that tax code cannot be changed based on the P45. It then requires conversations with HMRC. The employee needs to phone them, explain their tax situation, try and convince them that they want a tax code. Then they'll get a week, 1 month on. We'll say, well, you really want a cumulative tax code. They'll go back to them and say, I want a cumulative tax code, because week, 1 month ones tend to suggest they don't know enough about you. So time is of the essence. Allows employers to verify previous employment history and tax codes. So it provides information that may be useful to the new employer in verifying previous employment. It can also raise some questions. Sometimes a P45 will lead to significant tax refunds. Quite correctly, if you've been paid a huge severance payment and then you have 3 or 4 months unemployed, join another employer, that employer can be faced with the prospect of a £3,000 or £4,000 tax rebate without any bother at all. So again, we're always viewing P45s, certainly in that scenario, with an element of suspicion, and there might be circumstances under which you would want to take steps to make sure that everything was as it seemed, the backstory stacked up. It's little easier these days because people have to prove their identity and that they have a right to work and all the rest of it. So it's not quite as easy to move around with false identities and get jobs and such like. But it's a significant document in the paper trail. Helps us, or employers, us on behalf of employers, to maintain accurate records and adhere to legal requirements throughout the hiring process. So what we need to do is make sure that employees are allocated the correct tax code as far as we possibly can. And a P45 is a huge aid in doing exactly that. So that's the importance for employers. Moving on to employees. As I say, the importance of a P45 is far more long-lived for an employee. An employee may need to reference that document for years in the future. It's one of those documents they may come back to on numerous occasions for various reasons. So it's very important for the employee. So again, offboarding of employees, making sure that they do go to their portal, they do pull off that information. If as an employer you've chosen to use a work email address, which we try to avoid at all costs, but some employers, for whatever reason, think that should continue. The point at which it shouldn't continue is the point at which they leave your employment. At that point, they need to be on a personal email address because communications pertinent to their departure, such as P45s and final payslips, will be delivered via a portal that, if it's a work email address, they can no longer access. So it's as useful as a chocolate fire guard. It will have no value. So it's important to consider that in after they've left you. Serves as proof that they've left or changed jobs, crucial when applying for benefits or claiming tax refunds. So again, not only employers will ask for a P45, but you will also need it potentially if you're claiming benefits, and you'll need the information from it. You'll need to verify your income. Quite often these days, if you want to speak to HMRC about something, they will ask you questions, very specific questions about your income, your tax, your national insurance, which obviously P45 wouldn't help you with. So it's perfectly possible you would need that in the verification process in order to discuss something. So vital importance. And yeah, a correct P45. So if the P45 is correct, no errors, names match up, dates of birth match up, then in theory, that should ensure HMRC match your record with their existing records. They transfer any tax information relevant from your old employment to your new employment, and that should ensure that tax codes are maintained correctly. If the date of birth doesn't match, if the NI number is slightly different, then that's where things can start to go wrong. So it's as an employee receiving a P45, you would be well advised to check that everything is correct on it. So that's that. So P45 is an employee wellness. So the bigger picture, really, no P45 equals an emergency tax code. So emergency tax code is, it will be a week one, month one tax code because there is no information relating to your prior employment and prior tax paid. You can't use a tax code that references that. So it will be a week one, month one code. And that code will have the potential to overtax or undertax you. It'll, it can get the taxation wrong because it depends when you left your old jobs. You could get the income from both jobs in the same tax period, in which case you'll be undertaxed if we apply HMRC guidelines in the correct way. So it wouldn't be unexpected, it wouldn't be wrong, but it would be, you would be undertaxed. Equally well, if you had a different tax code, you could be over undertaxed, overtaxed, undertaxed. Either way, you could be over or undertaxed. The vagaries and specifics of that aren't important, but no P45 emergency tax code equals inaccurate, potentially incorrect tax. Lost or misplaced P45s. So yeah, I mean, this is a contentious point these days. Going back to P45s when there were pieces of paper, it was a piece of paper. You couldn't have a duplicate. Once it was lost, it was lost. You could possibly go back to your employer and seek the information that it had on it on their company headed paper or something similar. Please, Mr. Employer, can you tell us this? Provide it on company headed paper for a specific purpose. Nowadays they're electronic, and so electronic, providing a copy of an electronic document, it's a little less clear in law because ultimately you could have 100 copies of the same thing, which is the original, which isn't the original. So the important thing is to keep hold of P45s. We have obviously always got copies of P45s for current clients going back over time. So if we've generated it, we've got a copy of it, we can provide that. And you can provide it to the employee. I would say, a copy of the original. So we would never change a P45. So a P45 that's issued with an address, for example, that is the address. If the employee forgot to tell you, forgot to tell us, the address had changed and it causes a problem, it's not something that can easily be sorted by whistling up a new P45. It must be viewed as an original document and it can't be replaced. Late P45s, I've already said they're time dependent P45s. The later you get them, the less likely they are to be of use or relevance. Once HMRC have got hold of that tax record, issued a tax code, it is too late. You know, no ifs, buts, and maybes. You may as well throw it in the bin and send it to us. But you won't know that, so please don't put it in the bin. Please send it to us. But its relevance it becomes an obsolete document. Accurate information, so check in the information, which again, we use it in tandem with a new employee notification form. So we're always going to be looking for discrepancies. You know, we will always take the new employee notification form as the gospel in terms of current address, in terms of date of birth. But if there is an inaccuracy on the P45, like I say, shortened names are a favourite, you know, very often it leads you to ask the question. And HMRC base their records on a specific name. And if you start shortening it and call Frederick Fred or whatever you might do, the likelihood of a mismatch of a incorrect tax record will grow. So it's important that you carry out those checks. Accessing P45s after employment ends. So as I say, we issue P45s on the portal. We communicate via email with the employee to tell them it's there. You as an employer, your job really is to make sure they can still access it after they leave. So as I say, email addresses, if you use work email addresses, I would suggest that perhaps they're not the best because they're not always the most secure email addresses in the world. And when someone leaves, they might be forwarded elsewhere, etc., etc. So a personal email address is likely to be more secure, which is why we would prefer it. But when they leave, it will be their only access, and so our systems and records need to reflect it. Accidental issuing of a P45, so referenced that before. If you're issuing a P45, make sure your employee has left. You know, sometimes people are talking about the departure of an employee long before it happens. There may be the prospect of alternative employment. They may ultimately take up that position. It may be continuous employment, no need for a P45. Once the P45 is out in the wild, then the opportunity for error exists. And it's one of the reasons that, you know, we allow some gap between issuing final payment and issuing a P45, because we get lots of occasions where, for holiday not paid, overtime not paid, fairly kind of standard things that get missed. But when people talk about it, someone's left, and you wouldn't believe the number of times we get an employee who left last month and they're back on the payroll this month. So when you explore further, they didn't actually leave, and it just creates difficulties every step of the way. So try and avoid it. Be clear if someone has left. So that's that. Payments after leaving, always worthy of mention, payments after leaving. So we have issued a P45, we've done it, and it transpires a payment is required after the date the employee has left. There is perfectly possible to do that, not a problem at all. The problem is they will not get a new P45 and it will be processed as a payment after leaving. It will be taxed. They will be taxed on it in its entirety, regardless of their tax code and whether they would have been taxed on it before they left. So, it often happens. Then the next question will be, and can the employee have their new P45? Well, the answer is no, they can't. There is no new P45. HMRC guidance is very clear. You do not issue a new P45 having processed a payment after leaving. You give them a payslip with it. They have the details of the payment and the tax paid. They're then reliant on HMRC to pull things together and show that payment on their tax record. Well, if they want to rely on HMRC to do that, then good luck to them. it's better if they don't. So payments after leaving, uh, try and get it right first time is the best advice. And reissuing a P45, I've really covered already. Um, it's, as I say, an electronic document is a rather different beast to a paper document. And it took HMRC quite some time to realize there was a difference in the fact that everyone was transmitting them electronically these days. So they do recognize that now. Um, a new electronic P45 is indistinguishable from an old one. So we would, and the P45 will be available on the portal. I mean, an employee could reissue it every day. They could print themselves a new one every day. It won't change. It's the same document. So reissuing yeah, is available on the portal. So an employee can access it, or their employer, or we on behalf of the employer can access it at any time. So the information is always there. So that's that. So yeah, a quick internet search is always interesting, isn't it, when you're preparing for a subject and looking at what the issues are. P45s, um, some specific references there to. This is a guy who was in the armed forces. Don't know who does a payroll there. I suspect it might be a government department. Maybe they use Fujitsu software. Who knows? Anyway, the long and the short of it is a guy struggling to get his P45. An important document. The longer he takes to get it, the less likely it is that he'll be taxed correctly. So it's a regular question on forums and such like when and there are some vague replies in many cases as well. And what is practical in one person's world is not practical in another. We run a monthly payroll. As soon as practical. If the employee leaves on the first, you're not running the payroll to the 31st. What are the requirements in terms of that situation? So it's always an issue that can be quite emotive. So it's about communication as ever. When are you going to receive it? Making sure an employee is aware that there is no job in the world that an employee can't join without a P45. So it's a legal requirement to provide one when they leave. There is no legal requirement to provide one when they join. So an employer is being out of order if they absolutely insist on it, because a new starter form fulfills that purpose. The reason for its existence is to deal with that scenario. So it's about knowing what you can and can't do. That employer may not be familiar with the process. They may not know that stuff. So uh, this is just a demonstration that there are unhappy employees out there who, for the sake of one simple document issued at the correct time, wouldn't be spouting off on the internet about the problems they get. And we don't want your employees to be spouting off on the internet about the problems they've had, or spouting out uh, among their friends and all the rest of it. Such a simple thing. It's a document, clarity throughout. When did they join? Where's the P45? When did they leave? Is it the final payment? Is any paid due? All those questions that will be asked. If they're answered correctly at the time, then in all likelihood it will go swimmingly. Make sure the email address is correct when they leave, and everyone will be happy. Umbrella companies, don't you just love them? This is an interesting one, actually. I like this one. This is good. Has anyone had experience of umbrella companies, service providers, deciding to ignore P45s if they are in the same tax year but older than 8 weeks since the date of issue? So there's certainly no reason in a payroll context why you should be ignoring a P45 because it's more than 8 weeks old. They've named names there. We won't do that. That's a terrible thing. Um, Sometimes misinformation could be a thing, because it might well be, if that P45 had been produced 8 weeks after that employer joined, it may not be that the employer is ignoring that P45. It might be that the employer has received a coding notice and is legally obligated to ignore that P45. So, again, time of the essence, get the P45 in on time, etc., etc. So this contradicts HMRC guidance. It does indeed, because the way it's presented there is not right. You know, if you've got a P45, your new employer should be taking note of it and incorporating the information it carries in your tax code. So yeah, just be aware. We're always here to answer those questions if you're a little uncertain of what you're being presented with. Someone who's absolutely insistent they need a P45 3 weeks before they're due to leave you, or whatever it might be. So we're always here. But yeah, that's it really. P45s. Who'd have believed that an hour of your life could be spent talking about P45s?